Exercise foresight, poor eyesight, couldn't fist fight, had to overcompensate. Learn to be clairvoyant, see around corners, read signals and warnings, interpret omens, respond accordingly.
Broadcast from later. I don't know anything. We are exchanging weak signals of change. Those are things we notice, events, ideas, issues, developments that we don't fully understand, but we suspect might be meaningful in shaping the futures of our lives and society. As foresight strategists at From Later, we're steady tracking and trying to make sense of what's changing. And on broadcasts like this one, we're giving a glimpse of what it looks like when you're trying to understand something you don't know anything about. It's basically structured like show and tell. A few of us bring in a signal. The rest of us do not know what that item is in advance. And collectively, we try to make sense of it. If you're listening and you feel lost, you don't understand what we're talking about, that's no problem. Neither do we. Everybody's just trying to figure it out. Today, we have Macy back in the room call. Udit and Erica are here, our producers, Jeremy and Serena. I'm Robert Bolton, and we have a guest. That's Coleman Hell from Thunder Bay, Ontario, currently in Toronto, Parkdale, in his studio. Coleman, what's up? How are you?
I'm good. Long-time listener, first-time caller. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for being a listener, too. Coleman's a singer, a songwriter, most famous for his platinum-selling single, Two Heads. He's got a few new songs out right now: Bet, Save Yourself, Man I Used to Be, and a really cool vibey ambient pop R&B album called Topanga. He's on 604 Records and he's down with the Sideways crew. Coleman, a few questions just to like give people context on you. 239 River Road, is that an important address to you?
Are you trying to Nardwire me?
I'm doing the Nardwire.
239 River.
Do you know it?
I don't know if I do.
Can you tell me about how Sheila at the Apollo helped you get things going in Thunder Bay?
Yeah, the Apollo is like a super integral part of, the Thunder Bay music scene and kind of my story. I think it's kind of fallen on hard times right now. It might not be open anymore. But that's where I played all my first shows in my like rap group when I was starting out. And I met like one of my best friends, Sean Vincent DePaul, who encouraged me to come to Toronto. And we're still collaborating together in like the Sideways Collective. So that is, a really important music staple of Thunder Bay. Good reference.
Cool. Okay. And more addresses. I won't give your current location, but what about 1111 College Street?
This is good.
You like this?
Yeah.
You got your whole geography here.
1111 College Street is the place where I lived with my whole band. There's like 7 or 8 of us living in there. And it was just sort of like a mystical apartment where we recorded like all of our most successful material. That's where I recorded like Two Heads and Fireproof and most of that album. I mean, I feel like I should try and move back in there, to be honest. Could use that the magic again, but that's probably like my favorite apartment I've lived in just due to the vibes of it.
Yeah, so that was where Two Heads was written and produced and everything, recorded too?
Yeah, it was recorded on like I don't know what it was, some kind of like Radio Shacky mic.
Nice.
I think most of the album was written or recorded there. A lot of stuff was anyways. And I was living with my friend Stretch, so he was like an engineer. So actually tons of people, I think like Roy Woods was recording there and like Dylan Saunders and all these like different artists kind of came through. It was sort of like a hub. So yeah.
That's cool. I was thinking about like that era and the technology of like dissemination of music, and maybe you can speak to like the significance of Hype Machine with that single.
That was a really wild time.
Does everybody know what Hype Machine is? Does everybody remember Hype Machine as like a thing?
It was, I guess, like an aggregator, like essentially like a Metacritic or like something that was driven by people liking the song in the app or the website. But there was sort of like a gamification to it where if you got on a number of blogs, it would drive you to the front page. So I think there was a time where publicists would try to like get you on a bunch of like lower tiered blogs like strategically so that you would get pumped to the front page, and then it was kind of up to listeners, but there was kind of a way to like manipulate it, I think. And I
And that's
think
how you went triple platinum by manipulating
yeah.
hyperspace.
No, but I think it eventually sort of slowly dismantled because of that. But yeah.
Right. Anyway, I was just joking by that too. It's a really beautifully written song.
Really say I would not feel bad about it either way.
And then in terms of like more present day technologies, you've been doing stuff with NFTs. You have a Discord channel with Sideways, which is like your collective right now. Tell me what that's all about and how that kind of formed.
Yeah, I think we all got pretty immersed in it just because we're constantly kind of like making our own album art and directing our own music videos and editing things. And I don't know, just sort of like a bigger platform to explore the visual art side of all of our interests. So I've been like really enjoying making them. And so I'm pretty passionate about the creating of it. I don't know if I've really mastered the navigating the world of it because it's very like tech finance side I don't fully fit into yet, but I'm just kind of focused on being a visual artist in that world because it kind of gives you a platform in a way that there wasn't before.
For sure. Yeah, Udit's our resident like technical expert. It was funny. What was the strange balance or imbalance tension that you both related on before between cringe and like excitement or something?
Yeah, it's like I feel like so passionate about it in terms of art, but the stigma around it, I guess, or the way it's kind of portrayed, it feels a little cringe trying to explain it to someone who is not so interested in it. It's kind of a bit like antithetical to how you would used to talk about art, where it feels a little bit like jockey or fratty sometimes,
right? Which
don't exactly align with that side of it, but or maybe that's the sort of like tech bro side of it. So there's like it's like balancing the fusion of those two worlds is like a very interesting mix.
Right. Okay. And speaking of worlds, I wanted to just like ask you a bit about the concept of Tobago, because that's sort of how you and I guess, reconnected. We've known each other for a long time, but sort of became more friends recently. And when I entered your psychedelic travel agency. That's another address I should have on hand. What is it? Queen 11 something Queen? Yeah, this was really cool. This was back in November and it was the launch for your album Tobago that I described before. And walked in, I was greeted by like a flight attendant. It was kind of themed after a very, I think of as particularly Toronto, though they may be everywhere, type of travel agency that we see around Dundas and College Street typically, and walked in, but it was the real psychedelic version and sort of seemed to be like all about producing a feeling. And it also felt a lot like the type of world building that we do in terms of like the aim at a feeling and the aim at some coherence and stuff. So why did you feel like you wanted to put that together in terms of your album and like to go with your album as opposed to the usual music video or something?
It was kind of born out of creating a record and feeling like I wasn't going to be able to tour it. So I started thinking about how I could create like a unique experience for someone at home that like I otherwise wouldn't be able to give them. So I started building this world around like an existential travel agency. And I guess like maybe the event was kind of like a social experiment a bit, but a lot of it was just also like there was a it's still up actually if you go look, but there was a website where you kind of scroll through and there's all this art that's supposed to accompany the music. So it's kind of like when you're looking through the sheets of like a CD when you were younger. And I made all these fake travel ads and I made a fake company and like got the domain name for it. And I put up like flyers and it was sort of like just the idea of, I guess, escapism and inspired by, I don't know, like Charlie Kaufman movies and stuff I watched growing up, and just sort of like how we retreat into the nostalgia during hard times to kind of comfort ourselves and get lost in that. So it was really based on like collaging together old magazines and having everything sort of look, or because it was handmade. And I was like getting more and more immersed in the idea to the point where I was like walking along the train tracks and like collecting garbage and like making art out of it. And I just got really obsessed with it. So then it kind of became meta because I was like disappearing into this thing that I was trying to make so people could disappear into it. And then, yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah, I loved it. And especially like, I really related. Just like it moved me, that logo of the basketball with the Saturn rings around it was just like, I don't know, struck a chord right off the bat with me. I was like, I knew this was going to be the travel agency that took me where I needed to go. But it says it's early Tumblr vibes in the chat here. The website, that is. Awesome. Well, thank you. And thank you for being here. We'll get into it. Macy, what's your weakest signal?
It's not necessarily a weak signal, but it's just something that I was digging into with a friend. Shout out to Kofi. So we were kind of talking about digital crafting, and we got into the work of architect and design scholar. Her name is Vernelle Noel. She's at Georgia Tech, particularly in her work with using algorithms of shapes and what she calls developing a shape grammar to document and repair dyeing craft practices. And when she talks about repair, she's referencing like a urbanist concept in urban resilience around restoration, remediation, and reconfiguration. And in a sense, I thought that was really interesting in thinking about like past, present, and futures and creating alternate future histories. So Vernelle Noel, she spent like the last couple of years trying to record the dyeing and totally undocumented craft of wire bending, which is prevalent within like Trinidadian Carnivál. It's really specialized art that was developed in the 30s in Carnivál in Trinidad and Tobago. And they use wires that are bent with hand tools to create costumes and really elaborate dancing sculptures. And so it's a completely undocumented practice. It's also very individualized, and it's a dying practice because it's hard to transfer or translate and transmit the knowledge to younger generations. And so as an architect and a design scholar, she conduct field research with like prominent artists in Trinidad and started documenting it and creating the shape grammar. I know it is like a thing in architecture and also I guess like furniture design, but I just thought like that concept was really interesting to develop a vocabulary based on like the palette of materials, steps for creating connections and developing rules to essentially use computational methods to create this grammar, this language to document and translate or transmit these techniques. So for me, it was really interesting in terms of thinking about like how technology can help make tacit, more embodied knowledge explicit. And then also for her, she's brought this grammar into schools and at the same time also experimenting with scaling it to architectural levels. So building on that grammar to think about like stronger materials or different ways of bending the wires to create pavilion structures. So how can it be further scaled up into mega infrastructures? I mean, it's not really new, but I thought it was like an interesting reminder into how new technologies can be used as an approach to heritage and in terms of that kind of thought around what repairing crafting practices could mean in that cycle of like restoring, remediating, and reconfiguring towards new applications of craft practices. And then also particularly around preserving and transmitting the knowledge, but for future generations to build off of.
Cool. So the wire bending is mostly for like creating structures of costumes. Is that the way that it's used in Carnivál?
Exactly.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, so costumes that can be worn, but then it's not super large scale, but it becomes these like dancing structures with movement.
Yeah.
So
that's rad. So when you say recording, maybe I missed, what's the digital like component? Like how is the recording happening, or what's the like aspect of the like sort of digital crafting?
So component? She created like this shape grammar, which then, and then from there she was able to design new structures using that technique.
That's really cool. There's so much in this though. I feel like there's definitely signals in it and like very interesting frameworks and stuff as well.
Yeah, I guess the main idea is like how do you take like a practice, break it down into like it's like subcomponent parts and then bring it into like I'm assuming when you say like she's like using computers to like algorithmically work through different kind of like permutations, it's like she has like a simulation environment where she has like a bunch of primitive shapes, and then she can use them in like different configurations to like model out like
I think
structures.
so. With that as well, the other side of it is that it's also kind of becoming like a educational tool. Like she's also done it like in analog ways by teaching the grammar within schools or within academic settings. So youth or like design students are able to also learn that technique, and whether they're creating it with hand or through digital means, they're able to use it in new ways as well. And also like traditionally wire bending is very like individualized, very like male dominated craft, because it's just like it takes a lot of physical strength. But in this way, she's also able to like make it much more collaborative, much more participatory, and anyone, even those with like physical disabilities, can engage with it.
In the sense that they're like participating on like the collaborative like simulation environment or whatever.
Yeah.
The design side, I guess.
The design, like it's like CAD basically. That's what I'm assuming. I haven't seen it. Yeah.
There's a few places I go in this. I mean, one is just grammars and like design grammars, and also, just kind of the transliteration, I guess, that occurs, like going from something that is sort of like oral or like tacitly passed on kind of skill like that. And I feel like in this conversation we highlighted what's gained. There's probably something lost as well in transmitting things that way. Like certainly you get like a design system that's in some ways probably easier to work with, but you may be losing something, and it's probably hard to know what it is that might be being lost.
Yeah, and I guess it is also like it's resting on her as that translator to create that system for it, and she did acknowledge like that limitation as well, and also just like the need to observe and study more artists. Like this was mainly through the study of two prominent artists, but then it's like how to include more perspectives into that system.
I'm super curious if like the existing wirebenders, like the people who actually like have been doing this, like what does it do for them? Like are they like looking at this like system and they're like, oh, okay, you've taken this thing I used to do in this sort of like organic analog fashion, and now you systematized it, and like this is like super interesting because I can like do more with it.
Yeah.
Or are they like,
so she has shared it with them, and it is exactly what you're saying. It's like they're also starting to use it to further expand their practice or think about different ways to apply it.
Yeah, I wonder if it's going to like reshape the practice like long term quite a bit, because like now she's put it into a system, and like this is what it's going to, maybe this is what it becomes, because this is like what helps it scale up, right?
Yeah, but at the same time, it's also like they're like way older generation. That was part of the like impetus to do this, is that like those who hold the knowledge in their heads are dying or are already dead.
Kind of reminds me of this. There's like an NFT project called 400 Drums. And it's like these NFTs that are attached to like these like drums made by like an indigenous elder to like support that culture. And I think you get like a physical drum as well when you purchase one, or like they're made. And like I like the idea of like using something like tech to like maintain and preserve things that often get lost and maybe stand a better chance to stand the test of time when they're like transferred into something that's kind of like less likely to be forgotten.
Yeah, it's so interesting. We've like come across a few things like this, different signals that people have brought in. And it's kind of interesting that it's driven by a fear that things are going to be lost in many cases. But it almost, when you actually look at history, like the things that have lasted are the ones that are maintained more through like oral traditions, as opposed to ones that are like, let's say, recorded through technology. I think
what's an example of that?
I think religion is an example of that. I don't know, or values, like just values.
Didn't religion really scale up through like the printing press? Like that's like the classic example, right? The Gutenberg Bible. The Gutenberg Bible.
But look at its current state. How much was lost? Yeah, but I think it is like the sort of like the narrative aspect. I don't know that it would have been able to be viable at all if it weren't for like Yeah, but maybe you don't lose that necessarily, I guess, at the point with religion, but to like outlast.
I agree with what you're saying. Actually, it's like interesting. Like, you know, the ritualization of something is like what makes it like last.
Maintain. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think like when I think about this too, it's like an idea of like preserving stories and narratives that could get lost. And also like I jump to like the idea of like, say, like creating AI from like different perspectives of like different cultures and like possibly like rewriting narratives or writing new narratives from a different perspective as well. Like, I don't know exactly what I'm saying with that, but that's kind of where my mind is going. Like you could create like an AI with like a different ideology that's maintained by like, I don't know, a culture that's maybe like underserved or like not represented in the greater world, and like and kind of have like it influence things in a different way.
Yeah, well, I think that the idea of creating a grammar is a step towards like an automation or an like a sort of artificial intelligence, right? Like, and then you have that grammar, you can start to generate, and you know, it's like an efficiency in your design process once you have that grammar. It's the same in the way, like, I mean, even if it's only to the same extent that like a language is that, you know, like a grammatical structure and a collection of words is able to do that, presents the options in like a certain way, but then you really do start to lose sight of what you don't have codified. It becomes harder to imagine what else there is outside of your language.
This is a constant tension with technology where like to scale it up, you have to systematize it and break it into its component parts. But in the act of like breaking into its component parts and like systematizing it, you lose like some essence of the thing that you're trying to like scale up. And so like there's this question about like what's pure and like what's like the thing that you're trying to like preserve and like what's the actual essence of it, because you're going to lose some of it when you do try to like systematize it.
Yeah, but then you're also like making room for new essence, like reinvigoration of new essence from people who might not have the chance before. But yeah, I totally agree with you on that.
Yeah, and like if you understand like a technology as like a process of like changing practices, changing techniques and stuff, I think it makes sense, and like it feels like a pretty natural like evolution of like a practice, right? To like change it with technology and let new people like evolve it. But then it's like not preservation. That's the other thing. Preservation is like, in my mind, is like taking a snapshot of something and saving it in time.
Yeah, those are different things.
She also did talk about like kind of want to steer away talking about it as preservation, but that's why she's like using that word repair, but with that kind of encapsulating that cycle of like remediation and recalibration or all of those things. That's like talking about exactly what you're saying, like letting it evolve, letting it grow.
Yeah, because I feel like you could frame it as like preserving or scaling, or are you just like allowing this sort of like alternate universe to exist where there was the opportunity and the chance to scale? Like, is that really being like disingenuous or like not authentic to what this craft is, or like may it have scaled anyways if there was given different circumstances?
Yeah, and I think at least with this, there is that intentionality within the design of that system itself, where someone is actively thinking about and bringing in those elements that you do want to pay attention to, maybe.
Those three words, if you like look at, you said restoration, remediation, reconfiguration. Remediation, I guess, is like sort of preventing it from going extinct as a practice, is what I guess, like remedying the potential loss of this, and then like restoring like the sort of cultural like popularity of it, I presume, and then the reconfiguration seems to be like this grammar, like how we can start. It's almost like that third one is like, okay, this is what I'm like giving, like I'm not just trying to say like let's preserve this practice, but let's contribute and like create this new way of looking at it and like reworking it and rethinking, like almost creating the grammar for new possibilities within it. I don't know. That's like my read just based on what little I have heard from you.
What I have difficulties understanding are the automated forms, the algorithmic shapes and the grammar built off of the structures, the wire structures that have been made. That was something that I was just missing from the description. So there are sculptures and shapes that are being made with wires that are then being translated into into programmatic shapes, basically.
She's breaking it down kind of like into the types of materials, the steps that are used within this craft practice to make connections between wires. And then she's then deriving rules to be like, how can we go from one state to like another output state? And then using those as like a base to then, it's almost like breaking it down to building blocks, or like, this is your alphabet, and then you can create poetry out of it or something.
It sounds so challenging to do.
Building, yeah. I get the piece on building blocks. Just how it translates is a little bit hard for me to visualize, I think, in terms of going from like something that's automated to these sculptures, or sculptures to something that's automated. And then I have difficulties with like the Trinidadian craft culture being around wiring as a lost practice, because I feel like it's a huge part of like Carnivál, like how they make like their giant carnival structures. I think I'm also on the stick where I'm like, I'm not sure if like tech or something automated is really going to play like a huge role in losing like the craft of something like wire structures or wire framing.
Is it like the concern that just like young people don't seem as interested in this craft? Like I feel like that's a common
maybe
thing that you end up hearing, and like whether that ends up being true, you never know.
You're right. Maybe like there's already organic like ways of evolving the practice already, and maybe actually those things need to be added to that system too. I think it is just like maybe using technology that young generations might be more adept to, or I don't know, taking it out of it being really like a man's like laboring practice and using other means. I guess there are different routes to go about.
There are like mechanical tools too, right? To like bend wire. That's a way technology can intersect with this art form.
I do agree with you. Like digital is not like the only way to go. And she's also like brought it to, like I was saying, like to classrooms to think about it like the analog way as well. So creating artifacts, not just from like 3D printing or something like that. And also like using the system to think about, for example, like adhesive materials in different ways. So like, yes, you're kind of employing the bending technique, but can you use like new types of adhesives to then make it stronger for like public infrastructure or something like that?
The other place my mind was going when Macy was talking about it is like just like thinking about shapes and like the types of can we like think about new types of shapes that we haven't really kind of explored before. And I was remembering that in one of the like tech magazines had like this big like piece about a new shape that was discovered, which like blew my mind, because I was like, oh, you can still discover shapes, that's a thing. But there was like a new shape discovered in 2000, I think it was like 2018. And,
was it the shape of you? I'm just sorry.
Scutoids. Yeah. Scutoids was the name of the shape. And it was discovered like not too long ago. And it was like, just like the concept that you can discover new shapes still is like so wild.
The other thing it reminded me of that Macy and I have actually talked about before is what is it called? The Lieben notations?
The Lieben notation for dance.
We talk about it all the time. At least once every time we chat, but just that there's like these notations that that dancers are supposed to follow, but then also when they dance, they like create these shapes, and I guess they just are expressed in like little symbols and signs that are like read as dance movements. They're like notes to when you're reading music, or like notes.
Dance scores, yeah.
Dance
scores, yeah.
This is so sick.
Yeah, it's really, really cool.
Mm-hmm.
It reminded me of that too.
Yeah, Rob, to answer your question, one more thing that I was thinking of related to this is how the way we're systematizing things now actually like obscures the grammar in some ways. So like AI, like deep learning, for example, we're using, these like machine learning models that like learn what the internal grammar of like a system is. You actually obscure the grammar, right? Like you just like let it go loose on like, a bunch of data, and then looking at the data, it's supposed to learn the grammar, but the grammar is invisible to you. It's just a bunch of different weights along like the different nodes of the network, right? And this is like the sort of like classic like AI black box problem where you don't really know what it's doing. So we are building systems where we're hiding the grammar.
Well, for sure. But I mean, there is the attempts to codify it or whatever, right? Like, if I'm understanding what you're saying, like you're sort of saying like it's often there's a grammar, but it's often invisible.
Yeah. So like, for example, like we have real world systems that have been like converted into a type of grammar, right? Like, which is like, what are the rules of the road, right? That those are like, and like the tacit rules of the road, not just like the
trust
rules.
Me, I've been through this recently.
Yeah. Not just like the rules that the government tells you, but the tacit rules of the road, right?
So different
like,
too.
So different. And we have like all these cars that are learning this shit right now. And how are they learning it? By just like observing video camera feeds of intersections and stuff like that. And like, do we know what the grammar is? We don't actually know what the grammar is, right? It's just like learning it.
That's a good point. Yeah. And if you were to train the self-driving cars based on like the book that the government hands out for taking your test, it would be a mess.
Yeah.
It's like so different from that, right? In terms of what's actually happening and what's actually safe and all those things.
But I feel like something that those machines do have difficulties with, and this isn't to say this is what everything that grammar is or what a design grammar is, but that those kind of machines have particular trouble translating signs. And so we're constantly on capture, like this is a stop sign, this is a road sign, and we're telling it exactly what that is. But from what I've read, those machines actually have a little bit of trouble reading and translating like our signage, which is
Elon's cars can't deal with his stop sign t-shirt. Deal. Yeah. There's something that came to mind to me. I mean, with the dance ones, there's like a total grammar of like TikTok moves, dance moves that are emerging. And then like the other thing that is interesting that's popped up only in like recent years is I see like the application of like traditional like music notation and stuff like that to like rap, which was like never something I really saw. But then I think Vox or somebody did like a video breaking down like the triplet style that Migos was doing years ago. And then more recently, there's like whole channels of people like really explaining like the effectiveness of different rhythmic structures and stuff that existed. They were there, you know what I mean? It's not like but they were never sort of like observed and codified in this way. And it's providing like a grammar in a very different and just a very much more explicit way than that existed previously for people working in the form.
Because those are things that you typically aren't really thinking about, though. It's sort of like the way we understand memes or something, like the idea of like post-lexia, where you're like understanding things through like symbols and shapes, like the Le Bon
notations.
Yeah, so it's like interesting to like put a language to stuff that is like pretty universally kind of like unspoken or unwritten.
It's interesting. So you could maybe start to generate a flow or something now, and then like write to it.
I feel like with like the notation stuff, like, are we putting too much emphasis on visuals? Like, what if there's like a sound notation that's acts as documentation, or like assent notation instead? But I guess it ties in with like language and writing.
No, I totally feel like that's what dance music is. Like, there's a certain pattern to it that like is foundational to it. Like, if you listen to like a certain palette of dance music, you can like, it has the same kind of rhythm and bass line. But scent, I think, would be a bit more difficult. But
thinking of dance music as audio notation is such an interesting idea.
That'd be a good project. So just mute like dance videos and then like compose music based on the dancing.
Or have a song written in emojis and have everyone sing that song. See
how
like,
that goes?
Would it be different? Would it be the same? I don't know.
I think more emojis in musical scores would probably communicate music a lot better. We probably just don't rely on it because we have recording and musical scores now. But yeah, you could get a lot more mood across. I don't know. Armory Schaefer is like the Canadian composer who like is like pretty traditional sounding classical music, but like the scores would be like, you know, straightforward notes, and then all of a sudden like wolves, like it was just like these beautiful pictures that he would draw. And it was like just to communicate as best as possible. It wasn't like avant-garde sounding necessarily. Signal or noise? Erica?
I like the idea of different design grammars. And I think there could be a lot more application of it. I think that's how like language, how any kind of artistic practice like really grows, and like where you get these like weird variations of like culture. The term shape grammar, is that what it was? Shape grammar? Yeah, I think shape grammar is really evocative for me just because I think it's a interesting place to play. So yes, I think shape grammar is a signal.
Coleman, signal or noise?
I think it's a signal. It's like only becoming easier to do, and to like, I don't know, just to sort of like preserve things that are important. And I'm stuck on the past futures or future pasts. I'm really into the idea of that and imagining alternate realities where things were given the opportunity to grow and be expanded on. I think is something that is like pretty exciting to me, and I could see a lot of different applications for that. So signal.
Cool. Would it signal or noise?
I think this is like a really interesting conversation, but I would have to say noise, because I mean, I think it fits into like the sort of general like human relentless pursuit of systematization of everything around us. This is just like the standard story of like humans wanting to systemize everything and make it scale or whatever. Like I think it would be more
reconfigurable, all that stuff.
Yeah, exactly. I think it would be more of a signal for me if it was like, if this was like the active like restoration or remediation didn't like try to systemize something. Yes, there's gonna be more access to these ideas. There's gonna be more people participating in it. But I think that's just like the general story of like any art practice that intersects with technology.
Yeah.
So
it doesn't.
I'm not like moral. I'm not picking a moral side here. I'm just saying this is like not different from what's currently going on.
Yeah.
This feels like very much in like the standard kind of trajectory of tech.
I buy that. I'm kind of with you with it. I'll say noise. I mean, I think there might be aspects to it that I don't know, but from where we went here. Coleman, what's your weakest signal?
My weakest signal is the recent obsession with the multiverse. I feel like it's like obviously a concept that's existed forever in like religion and comics and conspiracy theories. But I feel like the way it's being embraced by the mainstream right now is like notable. And I've went to see Everything Everywhere All at Once and the Doctor Strange movie within like a week of each other. And I just feel like the like enthusiasm for this genre or this story that we keep telling is especially high, and just trying to like decode why we're so in love with that concept. And I think the easiest answer is that maybe we're kind of like living through this new dark age and gravitating towards surrealism or escapism or like the spiritual aspect of it. But the way I felt leaving the theater was more that like these films kind of felt like the internet, and the way the scenes and storylines kind of like unfold in like a tangential, non-linear way, like rapid shifts of tone felt like uniquely addicting to me, like the way I feel when I'm looking at my phone and can't put it down. And then that kind of like intersected with this article I was reading about upbeat nihilism, the emergence of this sort of like freedom or peace found in meaninglessness. I guess I'm not really sure what the signal is exactly, but like, is this like a rise of a new form of nihilism, or are we just like relating to being overly aware of the interconnectivity of everything? Or is it just like a marketing ploy to make endless sequels? I'm not sure, but I feel like it means something.
That's really interesting. So it's kind of 3 steps there too I think your signal here is the Multiverse Obsession and Doctor Strange and Everything Everywhere All at Once. And there's been several other films like that have come up. The Spideyverse one a few years ago comes to mind for me. And then you're saying, so it's like that. So like all of that kind of feels like the internet, right? And then let's like unpack the upbeat nihilism connection there too. What's like, how does that connect? I want to hear more about that.
Just sort of like the tone of the films. It's not like the lack of control or the other futures is like a necessarily depressing aspect of them.
Right.
Yeah, maybe that's tying too much into it.
Yeah,
but
yeah,
I guess
I get it. Sorry, it took me.
I'm more wondering like what's it indicative of?
Right. So yeah, it took me a second, and it's very clear to me now, like the overall connection, where it's just like, yeah, when your world gets sort of so big and so many things can be true at the same time, so many possibilities are sort of happening at once, which is like, yeah, our experience of the internet and all these different sort of echo chambers that might exist, and everything can also just start to feel like, okay, so what's meaningful about what I even believe, or what universe I occupy, or anything I do. But optimistic, we can feel it, but like, and fuck it, like that's the other upbeat nihilism.
I don't think I've ever heard anybody connect multiverse to the internet before. So this is like super, I don't know, it's super interesting.
Isn't the metaverse sort of implicitly connected?
I never made that connection. The metaverse to me is like, it's like the inside verse, right? It's like the meta, like it's not the actual world, it's not the actual universe, but something else. And the multiverse, the theory about the multiverse is like, okay, there are like millions of universes and they all kind of like coexist simultaneously. Like every possible universe that can possibly exist. Like all possible like kind of like configurations of the universe. Connecting that to the internet is like really interesting actually, because that is very much like our experience of the internet. You can jump into an entirely different life, right, in different parts of the internet. It feels like a completely different universe.
It feels connected to like the fractured, polarized culture of the internet, or like the death of consensus, like how someone could be like an anti-masker and someone could be pro-choice, and they could both be fighting for like bodily autonomy. We found like learned ways to use, or even in cases like weaponize like therapy talk or movement language or critical lenses to like validate any experience as positive or negative. And then through that, like each person is at the center of their own universe of self. So then like the multiverse kind of feels like the macro of that in a way.
Yeah, maybe it's also this big push for like connectivity, and the multiverse lends to, again, that narrative of like more connection, better connection of disparate worlds almost.
And then also it's like, is it positive that we like this story so much and are kind of telling it over and over again, because it's sort of reinforcing the illusion of all these different universes? And that's kind of how it feels to exist on the internet. You're in your own specific algorithm with your own beliefs. And in reality, it's like we still all exist together. So like maybe like the fantasy of the multiverse doesn't really like serve us or inspire change.
Yeah, because I see like, okay, I'll just accept that my world is okay. It doesn't have to be wild, because in a parallel universe, I'm wild and crazy. I'm living that luxury life. I can just be sensible. I can just be something like that. And it ties in with what you're saying in terms of like, it's almost like escapism, or leaving it for another version of me to experience.
Who did I love this? What you wrote here in the chat. You want to say it out loud?
Oh yeah, the joy of missing out on other universes. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with my universe. The other thing that you said, Coleman, which like caught my attention was, oh, is this just a ploy to like rehash the same old stories? And like, you know, we had like in the canon, we have like a bunch of these like established stories that are all kind of like happening in different worlds. And instead of creating new stories and new worlds, what we're doing is just like mashing up the existing stories and existing worlds and creating these new like crossover. And it speaks to sort of like the inability of like our creative media class to take risks in the current media environment.
Or is it that we don't want the stories to end?
Yeah, that's an interesting idea too.
It has the effect of watching television or watching movies to me. So like when you watch a TV show, you're kind of locked into something that's more segmented, these different storylines, they're all connected. There's some narration drawn out there, and that can be drawn on for like episodes. It can keep going. They can bring that back as a series versus a movie where you just watch it and you kind of like come back to it. You come back to that story, where I feel like television has kind of taken a pivot where you're kind of locked in, and I guess it's running on like binge watching things or like binge consuming.
Yeah, I feel like you're circling on something really interesting there, like the sort of linear, like we're used to linear narratives. These narratives are also linear, although they almost are masquerading as being non-linear by being like multiverse narratives, right? Like these films you're talking about, they feel less linear because you're dealing with multiple universes, right? But in terms of the story structure, they're totally linear. They totally have start and finish, and and they're no real different than the story structures you expect from movies and serial television shows.
I think it reminds me of like crafting a mythology of some kind. Like when you think of like like these really sort of like rich mythologies, like Greek mythology or Hindu mythology, we have all these characters, individual personas, and then all of the mythology is just like the different kind of like stories of these individual characters interacting with each other. And it almost feels like with the sort of like contemporary media multiverses that we're creating these like mashup stories of like established canonical characters and creating this sort of like pop media mythology. But it feels like we're creating like lore in mythology.
That's the common thing about these too, right? It's like, and maybe this is part of this weirdness of why it's the internet, right? It's not just that there's a multiverse. It's that it gets fucked up. It's that it gets mixed up. It's that you get mixed up. It's that like somehow it gets broken and you're in like multiple dimensions, right? And that's where reality gets totally like sort of disintegrated. Yeah, literally like disintegrated and no longer a cohesive thing, right? Yeah, worlds collide, and it's like and that's troubling for whatever reason. And maybe like to go back to your internet thing, like, yeah, is that what's going on? Like we used to have a better idea of a coherent reality. Things used to seem more coherent, except when we dream, but we can kind of like wake up and pretend that like wasn't important or something. And then now the walls are seeming to collapse in ways that we used to be able to sort of pretend other worlds, other point of views didn't exist as much. I don't know.
Multiverse as conjecture rather than like ever expanding landscape.
I thought it was kind of interesting how you were saying that it was masquerading as being non-linear. That kind of stood out to me too, because I wasn't really thinking of that.
Yeah, that was more about the artistic like goals or something, right? That's when I was thinking that.
Like it feels related to like engaging with the internet and stumbling upon a song or an article and feeling like you found it independently. There's this like data capitalism, like provoking you to click X, Y, and Z and feel this feeling, and sort of like the illusion of like choice or something. So it's like watching this movie and it feels scattered until like you think about it, and then it's not.
Yeah, it feels chaotic until you realize, oh no, this is like the same sort of arc that we're used to. I was listening to this Michael Garfield podcast, and he was talking about how movies from video games and toys and comics, I think, often involve like like it's always, for some reason, instead of just going in the fictional world and having it take place in the fictional world, like the Mario Brothers movie, Toy Story, like all these films are about like fictional worlds that are like adjacent to ours, and also involve this like multiverse rupture scenario where like the human world as we know it gets mixed up with like the Arnold Schwarzenegger Last Action Hero like thing, or the toys start communicating with the children and in ways, and it's like it's a really common fantastic trope. Why is that technique so common? What is it about that kind of? It's also relates to like breaking kayfabe, which like, yeah, like the wrestling slang for when they kind of like bring that world like maintain that fictional universe. That's a really weird example that is sort of just within the world. It's like almost like the biggest example of like that kind of I don't know, what's the word we call that? A multimedia narrative or something that plays out in real life. But yeah, I don't know. Do like fictional worlds exist in such material ways? And like, I don't know, what's the obsession with having these things collapse in and out?
I mean, I think it's like interesting to go back to Coleman's like nihilism point, right? Where it's like, look at the world and you're like, oh, is this all there is? And like, is it truly pointless? And like thinking about this like breach between our world and like other worlds, this like glitch or whatever, is like interesting because it's like a way of like not like kind of like succumbing to this fear that our world is all there is.
But then is it like limiting us? We're just like satisfied. We're not imagining, or I guess we're imagining like parallel situations.
But you're giving up on creating that change.
It's like the opposite of how change happens though, because change is like slow and like incremental in like a community in like one universe. So it's like the fantasy of like jumping the timeline or something is kind of like a cop out. Like you could get there, but that's not how you would get there, and it would take way longer to like make your universe better or something. So it's kind of like nice to think about because it's like easy, like devoid of labor. It's just like you can enter this better version of everything without having to like work up to it.
Maybe it is like allowing us to have these visions, because also like technically you're not allowed to, you can jump, but you'll screw things up, right? Like you'll break it. So it's like you can only go there temporarily. You can see this vision of what could be or what shouldn't be, and then you bring it back and then you do the work.
Yeah, that plot device of like, oh, you can't go and change something is like, that's also a trope and always reused.
Like Back to the Future type thing. Like if you go and change,
messing with time,
it'll mess with things in the other universe. Yeah, time or like dimension or whatever. Yeah, and some of these things, I guess it's all mixed up in some of these films. But just to go back to like, I guess what Coleman was getting at is like what some of the meaning of this was. Like why do we have this obsession, or why is this like in the popular imagination so much right now? This idea of multiverses. I wonder if it is just like through popular art right now, we are like confronting how confusing it is, that it's really hard to find like a consistency of like rules of engagement and values like that are important, like what's important and what should matter and what should be valuable in my life. And if you cannot find that these days because of the experience of the internet or because of the, it's like, that's what people are kind of going through. And so these films are like really depicting that sort of shattering and giving you this like, it's okay kind of thing. And it used to be like, I think like it used to be, that you could, when you would enter other worlds, you would have like those things were simple. Like when you play games or when you like, watch films, it's like, oh, okay, you like it because it's like the values here are clear. The rules are simple, Like I think of like sports or something. It's like you're playing hockey or something. It's like, okay, the physics are different, but I understand them. Like it's things are slipperier, but I know what's important is points. Like it's not, that's like a very, calming experience. But when 6 different sports fall together in this multiverse sort of thing, it's like, this is chaotic. I don't know what to do. I don't know what makes, gives me value here. I don't know what the rules are. And that's how, like, what people are feeling now. And that's what the art is showing us.
In order to understand, we want to break it down. But right now it's maybe we're accepting that it's okay, like to be in that complexity, to be in that chaos.
Yeah, for sure.
It kind of feels like a spiritual idea of like accepting that like everything matters, so nothing matters kind of thing. Like seeking meaning and not really finding like definitive answers. So like kind of like turning to things like a Marvel movie or like hope.
That's definitely going on. These are our new religion.
Marvel movies. I don't know. I also wonder if are we trying to like draw too much from this? Like movies have always existed or have existed for a while. This is a format that kind of works. and it seems like there's like a lot of demand for it, and that is partially that demand has been manufactured. And I don't know if it's necessarily because people are seeking meaning in these things. It's just like, this is like what's fun.
Just make the most of your franchise.
This is what's fun, and like, this is what's being produced, and people want to go have fun and watch a movie.
I know. It's like there is like a kind of a simple like joy or like curiosity about just like crossover issue. I remember being a kid and buying like The Punisher meets Archie, and it was like, this was very exciting, like comic book to buy.
It's just like how people write fan fiction.
Yeah. I mean, the one thing that I think is like interesting with the experience of the internet and this like crossover like media format that we're seeing in like the Marvel franchise and others is that there was like so much like user generated content and mashups that was already happening, right? And now we're seeing the same thing in like mainstream films and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate that, and I appreciate that like sort of the creative activity of just like bringing characters from different worlds, times, whatever. Like we've seen that so much in storytelling for sure, in so many forms. But I think there's something different. I'm like not willing to go like noise on this. I don't know. And I know you haven't seen Everything Everywhere All at Once. To me, that felt like significant, that it was like a significant offering in this moment. And I think there's something to it, going like the fact that it's happening right now. And also like these multiverse things are dealing with it in a different way, right? They're not simply just borrowing from one thing. And like some of these films are like dealing with the mental anguish that characters are going through as their realities start to collapse, and the walls of their reality start to collapse and stuff. Erica, signal or noise? Quick signal or noise?
I think it's a noise. I think it's noise because I think
Macy, signal or noise?
Sorry.
Signal. Who did signal or noise?
Yeah, I think
signal. Signals all around. Cool. We're getting into the last signal, which is going to be one that has been pre-recorded, and it's from Sid. And before we hit play on this, if you have a weak signal and you want to pre-record yourself, send it in to us. We'd love to hear it. We might try it out and judge whether it's indeed a signal or noise here on Broadcast from Later. Let's roll it.
So this week I'm bringing in Block Asset. Block Asset is a Swedish NFT and token platform for mainly like professional athletes. Block Asset made a video series with Kazmat Chimaev and Darren Till, who are two pretty prolific MMA fighters, like 5 episodes of those two training in Sweden. And what I thought was interesting about Block Asset, they are not only focusing on the biggest athletes ever, Kazmat being at the beginning of his career, Darren Till kind of being at a lull in his career, are examples of athletes using tokens to bolster their financial stability, essentially, and their kind of celebrity appeal before they've really peaked as athletes, or not during a peak as athletes. It made me curious about how tokens and NFTs, etc., are being used in sports in a broader capacity. That led me to thinking about how tokens could be used to support emerging athletes who are not necessarily pro yet, who are a while away from being pro. So those could be college athletes who recently, because of the NIL policy changes, so name, image, likeness in the NCAA in the US, emerging athletes within NCAA could start to use tokens to support their career financially before they're actually making a ton of money. Surely this could happen through fundraising, or could happen through Patreon, or could happen through Kickstarter, whatever, but like tokens just present another way of doing that. I read an article that was talking about, there's some areas of like Russia that has a really deep wrestling history, but a lot of areas within Russia don't necessarily have the economic power to support their athletes to make it onto the world stage. But something like tokens could really allow them to get there. So I just see it as kind of an interesting model for people to invest in the career of athletes before they've turned pro and really benefit from that investment like it's a two-way street, which is different than Kickstarter, different from Patreon. You're getting something in return from those versions, but this one you're getting a financial return, which is interesting.
How did that feel? Do you all want to see it one more time? Are you good? Good to go? All right. Set it off, Udit.
I think she's like really onto something. And in terms of like whether this feature is going to happen or not, I think likely there's going to be like variations of this feature that are going to play out where people are using, more sort of like unique tokenomic arrangements to share the financial upside of an enterprise together with other people. And I think a lot of this has to do with like, the ability to use things like blockchains to like create new types of financial assets to, incentivize people. There's obviously all the like negative aspects to this, like what happens when these incentives get corrupted, what happens when, we create like increasingly more abstract financial instruments. Are they going to become like new vehicles for speculation in an already unstable economic environment that we currently inhabit? And I also think about the sort of like psychological effects of athletes who are already under intense pressure and are probably like tying their worth as humans and as performers to a line on like a terminal that's going up or down. And given the current kind of like volatility of markets and how they can be so easily be manipulated, I just like question whether this like narrative that this is going to give more quote unquote stability to artists is like actually going to play out. And like maybe it will, maybe it won't, I don't know. Those are my general thoughts about the signal.
Erica, what do you think?
From the conversations we've had with Sid and about sports, I think have been really interesting in terms of like the current landscape of sports players, identifying the way they work in tandem with particular institutions. And that seems to be the case where NFTs are coming up a lot as like a mode of like a way to interject on that. And I'm super curious to know how that will play out as well, and what those like fine-tuned details of what's included in that, because I don't think that's as settled.
A lot of this feels similar to like other parts of the NFT world. Like essentially, even as like an artist, you're building an economy around your career or the future of your career, like an incentivized economy. So I think like something like sports, where there's already so much kind of like gambling and money like built into the culture of it, like I could see this being more successful than like other parts of like token based things, maybe because like it's kind of just like placing an extremely early bet on sports. So I think it like makes more sense than some other things. So I can see it happening, but I agree about like the kind of like putting that pressure on someone feels maybe a little bit toxic. But I guess if they're agreeing to it and it's helping sustain themselves, then yeah, I don't know, cutting out some type of middleman or something they would need, like maybe you wouldn't need like a manager or something, which might be kind of a cool incentive to having that. I don't know.
Yeah, I feel like it's similar to conversations around tokens and NFTs with the art communities. And they're like both sides in terms of being able to support emerging artists, but also like sometimes it's not very accessible as a technology, and understanding how to set that up and then having to maintain that. So I think it's quite similar. It's interesting that it's like seeping into the sports world. I mean, not surprising. And to think about like tokens as like another form of patronage. But I feel like it's all around the same conversations around NFTs within like the creative world.
Yeah, I mean, I like the point you make, and it's made about like patronage, that like, yeah, there's many ways to do it. Like the most interesting thing to me is about this notion of maybe not having to rely on a sports industry infrastructure the way that one typically would have to become a professional. And that there's so many sort of other ways that you can display like athletic ability and like talents and skill and actually be able to generate income for yourself now is kind of one of the interesting things about that. That may have actually more to do with social media though than it does tokens or Patreon or any particular like business model. It might be more just about being able to have distribution and access directly to viewers, to people who are becoming fans of you.
I do think that it's super fascinating for sports that aren't technically at the same level as like the NBA or like some higher degree of sports, like more fringe sports. Cause like, I feel like there are a lot of fringe sports that are taking off online and like on YouTube, or have a following that's a little less recognized or played on like on your average sports network. I think that's where you'll see NFTs probably. I mean, they're already popping up in the sports realm, but I think that's where they could be the best used and beneficial.
My assumption of like the way sports and tokenization would go was these athletes would be selling kind of shares of their enterprise, right? So you'd be like, okay, this is my career, and like my sort of like lifetime value as a sports person is say X, and I'm gonna sell a certain percentage of like my earnings or like equity in my like career as tokens, and you can purchase those the same way that you would buy stocks for like a company. And by doing that, you have, you're kind of like a member of this like exclusive like club, which is, my career, and which maps very well to like sports like fan clubs already, right? It's like this, or like fantasy football where you're kind of like betting on like a particular player or whatever. But this is like with actual like financial rewards. And so not only are you patronizing them, there's like by putting money early in their career, which is probably useful for them so that they can like train, whatever, or like promote themselves. But you also like have access to like, kind of like decision making around like their careers. That's actually another aspect of it, is like you can participate in community governance, which is like, I think like increasingly like the way I understand these like shared DAO projects going, which are like, a bunch of people from different kind of like sides of like the economy that's being set up. So the performer, the fans are all allowed to like participate in this shared economy together and like participate in like decision making and like the financial upside. I don't think this is simply like NFT like cards of like athletes. And I don't think it's simply patronage. I think it's like a lot more than that.
That's fair. There's like a few different ways to align upward trend or downward trend of the value of your enterprise here. Like, what do you think that feels like, and how? I think there's like aspects of that, like where there could be an argument that it's not different fundamentally, but it is different because it's like right there and it's like, calculable right in front of you. Like you could say that in the art world, it's always been like that, you're more popping, you're less popping, the value of your art's up and down, but it's not the same as being able to Google it all the time.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Being able to like literally look at the exact number every day.
Yeah. I think it must be like terrifying for folks, right? This is like worse than your follower count. Like, people talk about how they get anxiety when they look at their like social media profiles and their follower counts and whatever. And this is like literally tying like a financial value to you as yourself. I think it's going to be like terrifying for a lot of these young athletes.
And confusing as far as moving targets and stuff.
Yeah. And also like, what is it that it's going to be tied to, right? Like one of the things that we've learned in the last few years is that, stock prices are not totally like connected to like quote unquote fundamentals, right? Like you can like meme a stock to oblivion if you wanted to. Like I wonder like what are the new like weird social media dynamics that are going to play out because of this, and like how are people going to manipulate like people's like stock prices or like token prices? Like will players themselves manipulate their stock prices, right? Like there's like one of the major critiques of like NFTs is that people often manipulate, like artists will often like manipulate prices, right? By like just selling to like a friend and then selling back to another person and like going back and forth with the same NFT among people, as like a way to like show on the blockchain, oh, the price is increasing, but it's like just like all contained in like a recursive kind of loop. Like there's gonna be like weird shit like that's gonna happen too with these tokens. I'm sure they're gonna be manipulated. And that's just a problem with financial incentives. Like anything that you try to like, where you try to bring in new financial or like super explicit financial incentives, you'll see people try to manipulate them for financial gain. On the flip side, one of the things that I've been realizing more and more on the internet is if you do not explicitly design an economy around an interaction, you will see a perverse economy form around it. And this happens all the time. Like the classic example I think about is like, forums. If you do not pay your moderators and you don't internalize like a moderation labor, you will see like these weird incentives where like certain moderators who can like leverage their moderation position to like create a career out of it by like becoming like corporate shills or like whatever. They're the only ones who are going to make it on like these forums, and like everybody else who's like there to like do like good work like cannot survive, right? Like all the volunteers and the reason why is because they didn't internalize the economy into that platform. And there's a clear like an economic exchange going on here, and if you just like figured out the right incentive structure for it, you'd have like a better environment.
I think just like the nefarious stuff that could go on with the tokens or like the pressure, I was just like wondering, is that like, would it be like more or comparable to like the industry that's already in place and like the pressures that would exist in different ways if they didn't have the like sort of like influx? And then just sort of like the idea of like anything that becomes an NFT, we're then kind of recontextualizing it as like tech. So like I think like the model of like seed funding and like being a VC of your athletic career, like if you're like entering that space, you're kind of now being like shoved into that box or that shape. So it's kind of like there are people that in tech that have that exact same, I guess, like amount of pressures and things, but it's like we just haven't seen it in all these different realms, like in like sports, but it's like not like foreign,
I feel you in the sense that maybe, there will definitely be athletes here who can find a new career and like have access to seed funding to actually perform at a world stage, who otherwise would not have had investments, right? Because now you can have like a new retail class of investors who can fund your career. But anyone who has started a company will tell you how terrible it is to like, and like the sort of like the struggles of starting that company, and especially when you're like beholden to like people who have financed your company, right? The VCs who have backed you. Like I wonder how much like agency they're kind of giving up over their career also in that.
I wonder what's legal with that too. I was thinking about this, the expectation of like what could be tied to an individual's career. Because if you are an investor in one athlete's career and they all of a sudden have governance, like your ability to walk away from something, like you could see an investor being like, no, you can't take the season off, right? Like, and we've seen these things too with like Naomi Osaka and having just like Nike sponsorships and stuff, and different athletes feel like it's like kind of this is the sort of athlete agency thing. But I think it's very different when you have like just other people, investing in certain ways like this, and it's just an individual, not a team, not an organization, not a company.
Yeah, and it's like not so regulated, which is like good and bad, but there aren't as many like defined practices or precedents to be like, you can't do that.
I love the experimentation. That's the thing that I find really exciting, is that people are thinking about like alternatives when the world isn't working for them. That part is like the exciting thing. And like there will be patterns that come out of this, so we'll take with us, and like we'll evolve them and they'll be useful. But I do question a lot whether like, yes, we think like the argument for it is like, or like early career sports people and like, marginalized sports people will have like a way to have a career here. But what's likely going to happen is that we'll see a sort of like power distribution where there'll be a few people who can like survive here because everybody's going to like invest in like a small subset of like the professionals, and then there's going to be a long tail of people who struggle, which is like the case in most, like that's like the standard dynamics on the internet, right? On social media, on like YouTube, where like a very small number of people can actually make a career because of like the distribution dynamics of the internet, where if things do well, then they go viral and like they spread in this sort of like exponential way, and then there's like a long tail of people who are not able to kind of like make it. And like an alternative to that would be like, what if we had like a collective fund where we just like kind of like funded everybody, all the sports people who like meet certain criteria to like participate in sports, right? Like a public fund, which is what the state should be doing, right? And like that's the job of like public funding. I would love to see more projects around that. Some people would say that's like reproducing this existing structure by gatekeeping, because now who gets access to this pool, or would argue that we're creating new middlemen, because the thing that we're trying to replace here is like the state who has kind of like king-making power in like which sports facility gets like funding or not. And by like creating like a public goods alternative in like tokenomics, you're like creating the same type of structure. But I actually do think that there is like something there where like the thing we don't want to do is create the same like extreme like disparities, but like create kind of like use tokens to create like a shared buffer, a shared stability among lots of people.
Erica, for it, deal with signal and noise here.
It's a signal, I think.
Udit, signal and noise.
Oh, I think it's a signal.
Coleman?
I think it's a signal. I feel like it kind of exists in different iterations, but I feel like in this like realm, it's specifically a signal.
True. Macy, what do you think? Signal or noise?
I mean, I would hope it's a signal towards breaking current problematic system dynamics.
Yeah, I think it has to be. Yeah, I think that signal. Broadcast from later.